Okay, this video was a long time coming, but there were other videos that I made that I felt took more precedent over this one. But you all know me. I don't hold back. I don't bite my tongue. And for a while now, Rory, I've noticed, has really made some claims that just aren't true. And he's followed the case long enough, or he claims he's followed it long enough, that some of these things he's repeating, he should know by now, are not fact. So let's get started.
So what did they just say right there? Who was in the car? Was it an occupant or an occupants? Occupants. Occupants. So who's the one that gives the information out to the mainstream media to tell that? LE's the one that said occupants in that car. Okay. So once again, here we go. With LE giving out a different story. I mean, we could do this all day. I could do this all day, going through video of them. It's giving you a bullshit story, and then they change it once again and once again.
You know what that's called? It's called a red herring. And law enforcement often will put out fake information or not put out the full information because they don't want the public to know certain things. So in that case, they said occupants because they didn't want the perpetrator to know that they were onto him yet. So by not saying occupant, and by saying occupant, it makes the perpetrator breathe a little sigh of relief, and they may let their guard down. The hopes are that A, it will weed out false confessors, and B, the actual perpetrator may have enough rope that they'll hang themselves. Here is an example in California of where law enforcement put out false information to the media. So this article says, can the cops use fake news to trick criminals? Fake news is getting plenty of attention these days. There's a lot of it circulating out there, and in California, even the police are spreading some of it. Political groups blame opposing factions for creating fake news, distributing it through both mainstream and social media, and seeking to influence or change the votes and opinions of millions of Americans. Everyone seems to deplore the idea of fake news, and in many cases, it's difficult to get a precise definition of what fake news is. In one case, however, California police are admitting that they created fake news, but they claim they did it to save lives. So it goes on to say law enforcement officers in Santa Maria, about 140 miles north of Los Angeles, issued a bogus press release in February 2016, and Police Chief Ralph Martin says 2 lives were saved as a result. However, several of the news organizations that reported the details in the press release as facts are now objecting to the deception by the police and to the loss of credibility they say they've suffered. Chief Martin, in a response, says he would not rule out using the same tactic again in the future. It was a moral and ethical decision, and I stand by that. So it was talking about how the murder rate had skyrocketed, and news reporters had learned about the fake press release only months afterwards through court documents. The weekly Santa Maria Sun, along with KSBY-TV, reported that Jose Marino Melendez and Jose Santos Melendez had been arrested for identity theft and had been transferred to the custody of ICE. Well, that's the story the press release was told. We never arrested them for that charge, Chief Martin admits. They were never turned them over to ICE. They were always in our custody. What really happened? What really happened is that investigators monitoring the notorious MS-13 gang took the cousins into protective custody upon learning that hitmen were targeting the pair. The newspaper and the television station had no idea that the information they reported to the public was not true. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was not involved with the phony press release. KSBY-TV news director Kendra Martinez says she was deeply troubled about law enforcement officials deceiving the news media. Ms. Martinez stated, while we strongly support the police department's efforts to protect citizens in harm's way, we are concerned that this type of deception can erode the basic trust of our residents and viewers. Santa Margarita Times managing editor Marga Cooley said they used a public system paid for public dollars to present false information to the public. On the other hand, caller adds, when the police save lives, they usually win the support of the public. If the press cries foul here, saying that they were led astray by a false release, then you've got the press being angry about being misled. But on the other hand, the cops would say, but we saved lives. In that kind of PR battle, who do you think comes off looking better, the press or the police? And here is another article that dealt with the JonBenet Ramsey case. It says the secrets police keep, how cops decide which details of a crime to make public. According to some news reports, the man arrested for killing JonBenet Ramsey knew details of the case that had not been publicly released. In high-profile cases, police often keep some details about the crime secret as they pursue their investigation. How did the police decide which facts to withhold from the press? And it goes on to say they generally keep quiet about a few details that only the killer could know. Anything from an object left at the scene to the way a garrote was tied around a victim's neck. The chief detective on a case usually decides what evidence to make public and what to withhold, although his choices are sometimes influenced or overruled by the police chief. In a high-profile case, the police department will generally hold a press conference immediately after discovering a crime, but release few details about the case. Later, once those assigned to the case have had a chance to sift through the evidence, police will decide which details to make public. Police withhold evidence to help determine whether suspects they catch are guilty. If a suspect possesses non-public information about a crime, police reason it is likely that he either committed it or knows who did, and a suspect's knowledge of non-public information can be used against him in court. Of course, it's tricky to get a suspect to reveal such information. During interrogations, police officers refrain from discussing non-public details of a crime in the hopes that a suspect will slip up and reveal that he knows some of them. Withholding evidence also helps police rule out the possibility that a suspect might be confessing to a crime he didn't commit. False confessors often piece together information about a crime by obsessively tracking news stories and assembling as many details as they can. When questioned by police, they can sometimes offer convincing explanations of how they committed the crime. Police officers are trained to quickly determine whether such suspects know about the evidence they withheld. There's no surefire way to ensure that details about a case don't leak out during an investigation, but police generally try to limit the number of people working on a case in order to minimize the risk of leaks. And then here's a little more insight on this information. It's called dependent corroboration. At the outset of any investigation, the lead investigator should decide what evidence or information will be withheld from the public and all suspects for the purpose of verifying any subsequent confession. This is called dependent corroboration because the information is dependent upon the crime scene or other investigative source. In theory, only the person guilty of committing the crime should be able to provide this dependent corroboration. Okay, police will float false information out to the public. They also won't put the full information out there. And it is to protect the case, protect witnesses a lot of times, and to rule out false confessors. With the Idaho case, you can see where that was used a few times. Not just the car was saying there was occupants, even though they knew there was one person in it, but when they said Dylan was asleep on the first floor, like that her and Bethany were both asleep on the first floor, it's because the perpetrator didn't know that there was a witness. He didn't know anyone saw him, so they were protecting Bethany by stating that she was on a different floor than she was and that she was asleep. And then the other red herring was the time frame. They knew all along, once they started investigating, that time frame was around 4 a.m. They floated out that 3 o'clock time frame because only the murderer would know the actual time frame. They were trying to give the person enough rope to hopefully hang themselves. And this is a common tactic, and it's amazing to me how many people don't seem to understand. This doesn't mean anybody changed their stories. It doesn't mean the police changed their time frame. They just don't have to give you all the information, nor do they have to give you the correct information. They can use the press to put out red herrings. So let's continue.
But the coroner should have been there at noon. The coroner should have been there right away.
Yep.
They should have been the first ones there.
First ones there. Well, let's count the ways that they already messed up. Okay, they didn't call the coroner right away.
Actually, no, they did call the coroner right away. They didn't mess up. And also, the coroner cannot go in until the detective has done his walkthrough and secured the scene. And because Brett Payne was out of town, he didn't get there until 4. So Kathy Mabbitt was called around noon. She could not go in until after Brett Payne finished his walkthrough. And here's an interview with Kathy Mabbitt where she explains this.
When did you get the call on Sunday?
I got the call just a few minutes after noon that there were 4 homicides, but I didn't go to the scene because of law enforcement doing their investigation first. So I didn't actually go to the scene until about 5 or 5:30.
Can you walk us through, like, for our viewers, kind of the process between when police show up and then you guys getting the bodies and doing your examinations?
Sure. Well, law enforcement goes through and looks for any evidence, takes videos and pictures of everything in there, and they'll start talking with people. So I don't really need to be there for that. They can't move the bodies. I mean, the bodies have to stay as they were until the coroner gets there. So that's what my job is.
Officer that's under investigation by IA in the MPD. Do we remember that? Who was that process? Mr. Brady Giglio himself? Is that Rosendahl, Mr. Tommy?
Yeah.
Do we remember that? Yeah.
I do believe so. Yep.
But it's the guy that we need to really concentrate on is the guy that's under investigation, and that is Rosenthal, I believe. The prosecution has something that they're saying we normally would just hand this over to the defense, and it could be publicly available. But for whatever reason, there is something sensitive within it, and we're asking for a court order that protects it. So they're putting this under a gas.
Something sensitive within it.
Dude, they're going after this guy. Did something. He either hid evidence, planted evidence, or collected something illegally because they knew. I don't know. Again, this comes back to why was the medical examiner sitting outside waiting to be let in?
Okay, so I already just explained why Kathy Mabbitt couldn't go in right away. Now, as far as the Brady Giglio, there is nothing anywhere stating that it's Rosenthal. I'm not sure where those unfrosted Pop-Tarts are getting that it was Rosenthal that's under IA or anything like that. The document's sealed. It doesn't say who it is. And as far as why they sealed it, saying that it's sensitive info, it likely has nothing to do with the actual case. See, the thing with Brady Giglio disclosures is they have to disclose anything in somebody's file. And it could be from 15 years ago, it could be from the current case. But we just don't know. And it's anybody that worked on it. So that could be somebody that just brought coffee out to the investigators from the police station that is a peripheral associate. It could be a lead detective. It could be somebody on the forensics team with ISP. It could be somebody with the FBI. It doesn't say. Just that it was somebody that had, a Brady Giglio disclosure. So because it's not being released and they're saying it's sensitive, it makes me believe that it's something in the person's personal life that was made disciplinary at the job. So it could have been a domestic dispute, could have been a DUI, something like that. So we don't know. And it's kind of crazy to say that it's Rosenthal without proof, or that it was somebody that did anything with evidence in the Idaho 4 case. This is just, the Brady disclosure is just people that may not be a good witness for whatever reason, because maybe they've lied in the past, or they've had a dispute in their past, or IA, discipline, etc. Could be for insubordination, any number of things. It's any disciplinary issue on the person's records. So they're putting the cart before the horse with that one, but let's continue.
That's a bunch of BS. You know why? Because I actually went to Coeur d'Alene and looked in the devil's eyes, also known as Scott Green. And what did he tell me? What did he tell me that we're going to do with that vacant lot? Do we remember, guys? I'm sure most of you do. We're going to put affordable housing for students on that vacant lot. Just more money for them. Not a memorial like they said at first. They're not even going to leave it vacant. They're going to put affordable student housing there.
Well, actually, no, Rory. From your own interview with him, he didn't say it was student housing. And I'll go into that in a second. But also, University of Idaho never said that a memorial was going to go on that lot. From the start, it was always said it would be on campus. So I don't know why that rumor still persists, but they never said it would be on that lot. But let's take a listen to your interview with Scott Green when he talked about what would go there.
I'm sorry, I do have one more. Promise last one.
You can ask as many as you want.
Thank you. Do you have, if you can you tell us the prospective plans for what the vacant lot where the house used to be is?
So our plan is to give it to the College of Art and Architecture.
Okay.
We've got a program now where our students design and build low-income housing. They really do one house a year. We've got another property where we're doing that currently.
Oh,
We probably have 2 or 3 more houses to build there, but then I would hope that they also build affordable housing on that lot.
So affordable housing? Okay. All right, thank you.
So nowhere in there did he say affordable student housing, and he said one house a year. So had you done any digging, any investigating? Because you claim that you investigate, that you're boots on the ground in this. You would have known that it was this program that I'm going to show you. Okay, so it says UI nonprofit unveil new affordable home. Moscow House intended for low-income buyers was designed and built by students. Affordable housing just became a little more attainable in Moscow thanks to a partnership between the University of Idaho and a local nonprofit. The Moscow Affordable Housing Trust and UI partnered to build a home on the south end of the city for low-income buyers. The public can tour the home during an open house event. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And then they talked about the executive director of Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. He said, when the university approached me, it was like, yes, that's the right thing to do. Let's figure out how to do this. The 550 square foot home sits on a small hill and contains 1 bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a loft. It is located on 1.2 acres of land owned by Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. The nonprofit and UI are already planning to build a second home on the same land next year. The overall goal is to build 6 affordable homes. It was designed by grad students in the UI College of Art and Architecture, and the students also helped build the home. Peterson said the cost of the home can stay low because the trust owns the land and receives contributions from donors. The home's price is $127,000 and comes with a 99-year ground lease at a rate of $75 a month. It can only be sold to income qualified buyers, meaning those with a gross income 80% or lower than the area median income. We want to keep this perpetually affordable, perpetually occupied by somebody who's in our lowest income, he said. The buyer has to live in the house, Peterson said. They cannot move away and rent it out. And it says donated lands and small homes can be a recipe for affordability, and it gives the UI students hands-on experience in developing a home. And he says the students kind of really connected with the idea that it just wasn't, oh, we're going to make a cool design, but it actually had some sort of implications for the community and implications on obviously a major issue nationally in terms of housing shortages and affordability. So that was the program that Scott Green was talking about. They're going to build one of those houses on that lot. The university is making no money. Scott Green is making no money off of that. That land, that value of that land was more than what they're going to sell that little tiny house for. And it's not student housing, it's not rent. The university is not going to be bringing in money on rent. So had you listened to what he said and done a little research, but I get it, you want to vilify him. I get it. That for whatever reason you don't like him and want to make stuff up about him. So let's go on.
It's just really sad. So, we know what that was all about. It was about Scott Green needing and wanting more money for the university and to keep his behind out from getting any sort of, I don't know, all the looky-loos off of him. That's what I gotta say. So, but no expert agreed that the house should have been torn down. That number one right there should have been just, that's it. We don't, this house stays up. So again, I have to ask, why does Scott Green get to wield all of this power over experts, over police, over media? How does he have this much power? I know he's a billionaire.
Okay, Scott Green doesn't have any power over the courts or the police or any of that, okay? The house was donated to the Board of Regents. Scott Green works for the Board of Regents. They're his bosses. They're appointed by the Idaho governor. And then they are who hired Scott Green. He didn't decide to tear the house down. The Board of Regents is who decided. And as far as Green being a billionaire, he may be, but there's nothing out there that shows he is. There's one website that said he could be, and then they have a little fine print that I'll show you what the fine print says. It says, disclaimer, C. Scott Green net worth displayed here are calculated based on a combination of social factors. Please only use it for guidance, and C. Scott Green's actual income may vary a lot from the dollar amount shown above.
Donated it to his buddy, Scott Perky's the one who owned the house. He donates it to his buddy, Scott Green, who just happens to be the president of the university, with the intent that the house be demolished. So from day one, it was the plan to tear down this house.
So Scott Perky hadn't owned that house since 2002. And he wasn't in partnership with Dan Etsy either. They did not own the house together. Perky had sold it and moved on back in 2002. And there is no indication at all that Scott Green is buddies with Perky. So you're making an unfounded claim. So saying that, oh, he sold it to his buddy. No. Dan Etsy, who actually owned the house at the time of the murders, decided to donate it to the university. And it was donated to the Board of Regents, not to Scott Green. And no, I don't believe the plan was to tear it down from the start, but it was something that the Board of Regents started thinking about as they talked to students in the community.
They should have put their foot down and known and had the moral ambiguity, the moral know-how to say, hey, listen, out of respect and to get a real fair trial and to get to the truth, this house needs to stay. Did they do that? No, because Scott Green decided, I need to tear that down so I can make more money. Sorry about those kids. It's been a couple years now. Sorry. Dude, there's just enough of this case. Just enough.
Again, Scott Green didn't tear the house down, and they're not making any money off of it not being there. The prosecution and the defense both decided they did not need the house for the trial. All evidence was removed from the house. There was no reason to keep it up. And Judge also agreed. So who was going to put a stop to it? There's no court that would have put a stop to that being demolished. The only way to have stopped it was if somebody had went to the U of I and said, hey, I'd like to purchase this from you, and seen if U of I would have agreed to it. But there is no court in the country that would have put a stop to that being demolished. So get that notion right out of your head.
You cannot go physically to that scene. It changes much different when you're there. Now, I'm pretty sure they did a decent job with it, but like I said, were they asking these questions? What were the vantage point? What could they hear from where they were in the house? You're not going to be able to really understand that because now you can't walk into the house, hear your own footsteps, hear the echoes when you're talking to your fellow jurors, all that stuff. That's very important, because what do we always talk about here, guys? How many times have we asked the question, how did nobody hear anything that night when the walls are this thick? They're paper. They're nothing.
Let's stop right there. First of all, nobody said they didn't hear anything. If you read the probable cause affidavit, it's very apparent that Dylan heard things. So why do people keep promoting this rumor, this lie that Dylan didn't hear anything? She did. Read the PCA. She just didn't think anybody was being murdered. Now, as far as the house, it was not the same as when the murders happened. Furniture had been removed, things had been removed, asbestos abatement had been done. None of the acoustics was going to be the same. It was not anything you would want a jury to visit. And in this day and age with pharo scanning, juries do not visit crime scenes very often at all. Let's take a look. Okay, this is from a Miami defense attorney, David Weinstein, and he's talking about site visits. And he says prosecutors hope a visit will be the final piece in erasing any doubt that any juror might have had that the death penalty is the only recommendation that can be made. This was about one of the cases he was working on, but he says such site visits are rare. Weinstein, a former prosecutor, said in more than 150 jury trials dating back to the late 1980s, he has only had one. One reason for their rarity is that they are a logistical nightmare for the judge, who needs to get the jury to the location and back to the courthouse without incident or a risk of mistrial. And in a typical case, a visit wouldn't even present truthful evidence. After law enforcement leaves, the building or public space returns to its normal use. The scene gets cleaned up, objects get moved, and repairs are made. It's why judges order jurors in many trials not to visit the scene on their own. And they say in a criminal trial, both the defense and the prosecution can request that juries view a crime scene, and it's generally up to the judge to decide whether to approve it. In many cases, it doesn't happen because the trial is taking place years later, so the scene has changed, and taking jurors there could provide a false impression of what happened. So it's really much ado about nothing about the house being torn down. It's people getting upset about it. It's for no reason, because neither the prosecution or defense was going to do a jury visit anyway. So it was a non-issue whether it stood or didn't stand. They weren't taking the jurors there anyways. And the pharo scans are going to give them a 3D view of what it was like. So all of this crying and, oh, it should have stayed up, and oh, Scott Green didn't make that decision. Again, the Board of Regents did, and it's a non-issue. It really is. But let's continue.
Now, has anyone ever heard of evidence being buried in a hole somewhere and never to be seen again? I've never heard of this, especially a house.
Yeah, when you have people like death tourists that go around looking to take pieces of buildings where high-profile murders happened in, of course you're going to bury all of that so that people can't take a piece and go sell it on eBay. Use your brain.
So Scott Green wrote this in his book, in that chapter, that the Brian Koberger chapter is what I call it, where they're having daily meetings, not once, but like probably multiple times a day. And you heard it in the Scott Green interview that I had for you too, where I asked him how long do these meetings take place, what were they about? And it was about a contingency plan.
Why would a president of a school want to be informed every day, every single day, of the progress of the case? That is the police department's job to figure that out. And he should not have been included in any of that. It didn't even happen on campus.
This is not unusual at all. I just think it's because it's been a while since somebody that murdered college students took a while to be caught by law enforcement. You have to remember, these were 4 students of the University of Idaho who lived feet from campus. So of course it involved the university as far as making sure the campus was safe and honoring these 4 students, candlelight vigils, etc. And University of Idaho doesn't have its own police force, not like WSU that has its own. So the Moscow police are the campus police. So of course the university president is going to be in on briefings with the police that cover the campus. And it's not much different than John Lombardi back when Danny Rolling killed University of Florida students back in 1990 in Gainesville. He was in contact daily with both the Gainesville Police Department and the University of Florida Police Department, and a lot of his comments he made are very similar to what Scott Green said with these University of Idaho murders. Contingency plans have to be put in place by these university presidents when something like this happens near campus to students. So I found this article from the University of Florida murders. The killings prompted an exodus of nervous students from the campus last week, and others left because of the Labor Day holiday. University officials said classes would resume Tuesday, and atmosphere as close to normal as possible. Kind of sounds a lot like University of Idaho. It happened near Thanksgiving break. University of Florida President John Lombardi urged students to return. He said security patrols would be increased and on-campus housing would be arranged for those who were too scared to stay off campus alone. To tell you that there is no crime, to tell you that there are no fatalities that will occur is simply not to be realistic, Lombardi said. Would I send my child back to the University of Florida? The answer is yes, I would. Sounds a lot like Chief Fry as well. But yet, here you all were criticizing Green and Fry, claiming that this is uncommon. No, it's not uncommon when something like this happens. And Lombardi said only about 100 of the university's 34,000 students had notified campus officials they would not return. A spokesperson for the Gainesville Police Department said there was no new information to report about the search for the killer or killers. The media has requested daily briefings from us, so we're complying even if there is nothing new to report, which is the situation today, said Barry Luke, Director of Communications for the Police Department. Sounds really familiar to what Moscow PD did as well. Also interesting is parents were writing John Lombardi, so he was writing them back. And on one of the letters he said, no doubt by now you've seen and heard the media of the recent tragic deaths of several young people in the Gainesville area. Talked about joining us in mourning. We offer a variety of security, psychological, housing, and food services to students and others. Many of those services have been expanded and with increased hours of operation. So, who does that sound like? Sounds a lot like Scott Green. Our University Police Department is working closely with the Gainesville Police Department and the Alachua County Sheriff's Office and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to do all we can to mobilize our law enforcement services in the area and provide the best protection and safety possible. And then in this letter to a parent, he was basically saying that it was time to get back to what they did best, which was education. So he says, for now, we must support each other and move forward. We will do all we can to keep your daughter and all of our students as safe as possible. And I'm sure a lot of people probably felt like, oh, how cold of him to say that. But, you know, as time went on and nobody had been caught, you still have to go back to school. And again, in this letter, he also talked about how they increased security efforts to include more on-campus police patrols and extended nighttime escort services to include off-campus sites throughout Gainesville. So he was working closely with Gainesville Police and the Sheriff's Department. And then it was hard to find a lot of articles out there about what Florida State University did when Ted Bundy did the attacks off campus at the Chi Omega house and the other condo that a woman was living in. But they did get a quote in this article from the Florida State President, Bernard Slager, and he said, we must comfort one another. We must look each to the other for the support and encouragement, which must be dredged to the surface from the depths of our individual and collective despair. He said that at a memorial service that they had for the slain students. So that's not unusual at all. I think the criticism came from people just having short memories, or maybe they weren't alive when some of these other murders happened. Because that is the role of a university president. They are supposed to be meeting with the local authorities to make sure they keep campus safe. And when there was the Brentwood stabbings up in Calgary, even though that was off campus and a couple of the people stabbed weren't University of Calgary students, University of Calgary still helped out with the investigation, did memorial service, candlelight vigil, etc. Recently, a gymnast was just killed at one of the University of Wisconsin branch campuses, and their university president immediately extended services to anyone that would need them for counseling. They held a candlelight vigil. Now, the murderer was caught immediately. I think the difference is it's been a long time since you've had a murderer of college students that didn't get caught right away. Most of the time, like shootings, things like that, like the University of Virginia that happened the same weekend as the Idaho 4, he was caught immediately. So when something goes on for 6 weeks, the closest parallel was University of Florida with Danny Rolling. And John Lombardi did the same things that Scott Green's doing. And I was in college back when that happened, or well, graduating high school and just starting college. I don't remember anybody criticizing John Lombardi like now. Of course, social media wasn't around like it is now, but everybody took it as normal that he would be meeting with the police daily. So I think it's just something that people don't like Scott Green, so they want to nitpick on things that absolutely were not wrong. They were nothing wrong, but they want to turn them into something wrong. So let's continue.
Do you guys know this about the student program there, the criminology one there? They are volunteer first responders. Very interesting. Do you know who the first responders were there at the house that day? Volunteers, students. The very students that very much could have, I don't know, rubbed shoulders and shook hands with Brian Kohlberger? Oh, that's interesting.
So, no. The first responders there were not students. The criminal justice program does not have anything like that at University of Idaho. It is the fire department that has a program where students can volunteer. And because the ambulance was waved off after police went into the house, there was nobody from that volunteer service that went into the house at all. Also, there's no reason to believe that anyone of that volunteer service would have shook hands, rubbed elbows with Koberger, because he is over at WSU, not at University of Idaho. But here's a little bit of information on that University of Idaho fire department program. Okay, so this talks about the university relationship and says Moscow Volunteer Fire Department forges an active bond between long-term residents of Moscow and the students at the university. Many students serve as resident volunteers who are charged with providing around-the-clock coverage for Moscow's 3 fire stations. Working cooperatively with the University of Idaho, these students live in the fire stations at no cost and provide quick responsive equipment to the sites where it is needed. Many of these residents go on to careers as firefighters and administrators in other departments throughout the country. Now, Moscow Police Department does have a cadet program with the University of Idaho, and the requirements are 18 years of age or older, currently enrolled as a full-time student in the college or university, interested in a career in law enforcement, meet and maintain a 2.5 GPA or higher, commit to participate in the program a minimum of 20 hours a month, and possess a valid driver's license. And you have to pass application and testing process and subsequent background investigation and attend all program trainings or meetings. So it says after the completion of the mini academy, cadets are required to attend biweekly trainings, which are held at the police department, and must complete at least one ride-along with an officer each month. And it says there's many opportunities for cadets to be involved in other MPD functions, including working alongside officers at University of Idaho's sporting and entertainment events. So those Moscow PD cadets would not have been at a homicide scene. They would not have been there. Now, the volunteer fire, there could have been some students, yes, on that volunteer fire crew and ambulance crew, but they never went into the house. They were waved off. Once Moscow PD went into the house, as I said, they waved off the fire and emergency services, the ambulance. So there was none of those student volunteers that went into the house. So, and part of why people are trying to claim that some of them went in is they claim there could have planted Koberger's DNA. Well, that's just not realistic because, again, different university anyway than the one Koberger was working at. So let's continue.
seen this picture before. Can you explain why? Okay, so Maddie's in the background. I showed this picture to you before. Can you explain what the hell this guy's doing here?
That was the first words out of my mouth were, what the heck? What is going on here? This guy is way too old and unattractive. Sorry, not sorry. He's
sorry.
carrying a drink in their house. I mean, he looks like a creeper, just straight up.
This is really hard to talk about because it's just like, I just can't believe what possibly could have been happening at this house. And it just becomes more and more obvious the more you dig into it, and hearing how you're explaining it to me. This guy was obviously there either to groom or maybe slip rugs into their drinks, or he has no good intentions, in my opinion.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the man in the picture was a father of somebody that lived in 1122 King Road. It was at a celebration that they were having at the house. There was nothing untawdry going on. No one was grooming anyone. There was no sex trafficking. You know, it's normal for parents, for fathers to come to parents' weekends, to come to birthday parties, to come to graduations, etc. And to try to turn this into some sort of sex trafficking thing and make claims about somebody's dad being a creeper and being a groomer without any proof is gross.
So I want to give you a little background on the owner of the house. So the owner of the house at the time that the crimes occurred, I'm not going to say his name. We all know who he is. Anybody who's here, we all know who he is. But he was a registered sex offender, specifically with young girls. So It is widely speculated that there are cameras and wires and a whole operation going on there. So can you kind of let us, what am I trying to say? I met this man too. His name is Scott Green, and he is the president of the University of Idaho. Now, we got a lot of problems with this guy, okay? So as I told you before, the owners of the house that at the time that the crimes occurred are alumni of the University of Idaho as well. And they donated the house, or he specifically donated the house to the University of Idaho with the intention of the house being destroyed as soon as possible. So, I mean, in your opinion, what does that scream?
That's not suspicious at all.
No.
Wrong again, Rory. Scott Perky, who is a sex offender and on the sex offender registry, had not owned the house since 2002. We already went over that earlier. I already showed when he sold the house. Dan Esty was the owner at the time the murders happened, and he is not on the sex offender registry. And he also isn't an alumni of U of I. He graduated from University of Colorado Boulder. Also, Scott Perky wasn't a U of I alum either. And again, there's no indication that either of them even knew Scott Green. And there's no indication that Dan Esty knew the house was going to be torn down when he donated it. Oh, and if the house were wired and it had cameras and everything, I'm sure they would have caught Koberger a lot sooner. So it's clear that the house did not have any cameras or anything wired in there for anything nefarious like you guys are trying to make it out to be.
Okay. I mean, I'm sorry, but that house is a house of horrors. It just is. There was so much nefarious stuff. I mean, there's rumors, there's tunnels underneath there. Once again, rumors. There's tunnels there's also rumors that there's tunnels under one president's house, Mr. Scott Green, and that there's a red room in there. Can you tell us what a red room is, if you know what that is at all?
Oh my gosh.
Seriously, you really said that. And then preface it, oh, it's rumors. Oh, but there's rumors tunnels are going under Scott. Okay, that's not Scott Green's house. He lives in it while he's the president, but it belongs to the state of Idaho, the Board of Regents. It was built by the Board of Regents, who are appointed people out of Boise. It is not a private residence per se. It was not built to any one particular specifications. It was built to house university presidents for years to come. So I seriously doubt that there's tunnels or a red room Give me a break. And what's interesting is you tried to separate yourself from Tommy's live that night where he was talking about that exact same thing. And yet here you are repeating those exact same ludicrous rumors. Give me a break.
Being controlled by a higher power to not really talk. I mean, because every time, so I've gone down there and I've tried to talk kids at when the crimes occurred. I went down there to try to, and everybody was scared out of their mind to talk. So, in your opinion, do you think there's a possible? And there's also rumors that the college already knew before the police knew what had happened that night, and that they were already sending out messages to not talk. So, in your opinion, is that highly possible?
Highly possible. And in fact, I was going to say they're probably terrorized, and then you actually said that that's what you encountered.
Well, gee, I don't know, Rory. Maybe they just didn't want to talk to you because they were already tired of the web sleuths and national media as well coming onto campus and hounding people. I mean, what do you expect when you go around harassing people? It wasn't anything to do with them being scared to talk. They just didn't want to talk to you. And as far as the university knowing before the 911 call, I can guarantee you, I know for a fact they did not know before the 911 call. No emails were being sent out. Nobody on staff was being told to shh.
And then there's a girl named Emma Bailey. She was about 22. So it's very obvious that they were, and they got busted for this as well. They were dealing drugs out of that house. Now,
hold up there. When was Emma dealing drugs out of 1122 King? Because that's nothing that's ever been proven. Just curious where you're getting that information out of your ass, possibly.
And so they got busted for giving him a bad batch. But then 10 days after they get arrested, they are pardoned. They are let out of jail. So it's widely suspected that they are part of that possible ring and that they rolled on this possible ring. So what do you think?
So they weren't pardoned. What happened was the exchange of the drug happened in King County, happened up in the Seattle area. And he overdosed in the Seattle area, was taken to Harborview. He then called a friend to come get him. So he checked out of the hospital, and actually, as I understand it, it was also against advice. But his friend came and got him and took him back to Centralia, which is in Lewis County. And at some point, while he was there sleeping on his friend's couch in Centralia, he passed away. So, Lewis County is who arrested Emma and Demetrius. But the drug sale occurred up in King County, not in Lewis County. So the judge in Lewis County had no choice but to dismiss the case because it was the wrong jurisdiction. And then he even said that this is for, if King County wants to file it. Now, don't hold your breath because King County doesn't go after a lot of drug charges. But that is why the charges got dismissed in Lewis County. It was because, yes, his death occurred in Lewis County, but the drug exchange happened up in King County, and that's the jurisdiction for the drug as far as responsibility. So I've cleared that up before, but this rumor still keeps persisting that they must be informants because there's no way that would get dismissed. Well, when things are put in the wrong jurisdiction, they get dismissed by judges because that's how it works. Okay, I know this was a long video, so thank you for sticking with me through it if you watched the full video. It's just I had watched his last few lives and had just had several things I wanted to address, but there was other videos that I thought were more important to do in the meantime. So finally I decided to put all these clips together and address the amount of misinformation that comes out of his lives. And it's pretty amazing for somebody that claims he's so in depth on covering this case that he gets so many things about it wrong or doesn't actually investigate into anything very far. So, as always, let me know if there's something you would like me to cover. Thank you.